Welcome to The Explainer. We're all about turning complex history into something you can really grasp. So today we are tackling a big one. We're looking at the years that really set the stage for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
To really get what's happening now, you have to go back to the beginning. We're talking about a time when empires were crumbling, new national identities were taking shape, and a whole bunch of conflicting promises were made. Promises that would basically guarantee a future struggle.
So that's what we're going to do. We'll follow the thread from the end of the Ottoman Empire right through the British Mandate all the way to the war in 1948. You're going to see how global politics, on-the-ground tensions, and these two powerful national movements crashed into each other, literally redrawing the map and setting the course for the future. All right, so let's set the scene. We're in the middle of World War I. The old Ottoman Empire, which had ruled this region for centuries, is falling apart. And as it crumbles, you've got new powers stepping in, making promises left and right, and that's really where the seeds of this conflict were planted. Okay, so check out this timeline. It's kind of wild. It shows you just how messy this period was, mostly because of Britain's wartime politics. In 1915, they're promising Arab leaders independence if they help fight the Ottomans. Makes sense, right? But then, just a year later, they're secretly cooking up a deal with France, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, to carve up the exact same land for themselves. And if that wasn't complicated enough, in 1917, they turn around and make another promise, this time to support a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. Talk about playing all sides. And right there, that's the core of the problem. You've got these two incredibly powerful movements on a collision course. On one hand, you have Arab nationalism, which was promised an independent state. On the other, you have the Zionist movement, which was also promised a national home, in the very same place. Britain essentially lit the fuse and put these two groups on a path to direct confrontation. Okay, so the war ends, and the new League of Nations basically hands the keys to Palestine over to Britain. You'd think this would be a chance to sort things out, right? Nope. Instead of fixing the mess, British rule just made it worse. Those contradictions we talked about, they became part of the system, fueling tension day by day. So what did this look like on the ground? Well, first, Jewish immigration from Europe really ramped up, and with it came money and the development of a completely separate Jewish economy. Now here's a crucial point. The British officially recognized something called the Jewish Agency, which acted almost like a government in waiting. It gave the whole Zionist project a stamp of legitimacy. The Arab community, meanwhile, had nothing like that, no recognized body to represent them. This created a huge political imbalance. And as tensions rose, early riots led to the creation of the Haganah, a Jewish paramilitary force. So you can see how the two communities were becoming more and more separate and more organized for conflict. Yeah, this whole situation, this imbalance over land, money, and power, was basically a tinderbox. And by the late 1920s, it ignited. The 1929 riots were a turning point. As you can see from the numbers here, the violence was absolutely devastating for both sides. This wasn't just small-scale scuffles anymore. This was a sign of a much deeper, more violent conflict to come. So things didn't calm down. In fact, all that simmering tension boiled over into something much bigger, the Great Arab Revolt. This was a massive, years-long uprising, and it was a real game-changer. It forced Britain to rethink its policies, and critically, it left the Palestinian Arab community in a much weaker position right before things got even more intense. So what was this revolt all about? Well, it was a full-blown nationalist uprising. It started as a general strike, but it didn't take long to become a widespread armed conflict. This was Palestinian Arabs rising up against two things: British colonial rule and the mass Jewish immigration that rule allowed. A huge part of it was driven by economics too, especially the fear of losing land. And nothing captures the feeling at the time quite like this political cartoon. You see Zionism depicted as a crocodile, telling a Palestinian Arab, "Don't be afraid, I will swallow you peacefully," with a British officer literally standing guard. It's just a perfect, powerful snapshot of the fear of being displaced, of being consumed, that was driving so much of the anger and resistance. So how did it end? Well, the British came down hard, really hard. The revolt was crushed, and the cost for the Palestinian community was just staggering. We're talking about at least 10% of the adult male population being killed, wounded, jailed, or exiled. This left them politically shattered and without military leadership, which is a huge deal considering what was about to happen next. Okay, fast forward a bit. World War II is over, Britain is exhausted, broke, and now they're dealing with a growing Jewish insurgency against their rule in Palestine. They've had enough. They just can't handle the crisis anymore. So what do? They basically throw up their hands and say, we're out. They hand the whole hot potato over to the brand new United Nations.
And this was a massive turning point. For the first time, the future of Palestine wasn't going to be decided by Britain. It was now in the hands of an international body. The UN was going to try and solve this from the outside, literally by drawing a line on a map, a line that would change, well, everything. So, the first thing the UN did was send a committee to figure out what was actually happening on the ground. And this table gives you a snapshot of what they found. Demographically, the Jewish population made up about a third of the total, while the Arab population was the clear majority, at around 63%. And when it came to land ownership, the difference was even starker, about 7% owned by Jews and the rest mostly by Arabs.
So based on that data, the UN came up with its big solution, the partition plan. The idea was to split Palestine into 2 states. But here's the controversial part. As you can see in the chart, the plan gave 55% of the land to the Jewish state, even though the Jewish population was only about a third of the total. The Zionist leadership, for their part, accepted the plan, but Arab leaders flat out rejected it. From their perspective, it was completely unfair to give the majority of the land to the minority population.
But that UN vote, it wasn't a solution. It was a starting pistol. The moment the plan was rejected by one side, a civil war broke out. And that civil war would soon spiral into a much wider regional war, one that would lead to the birth of a new country and a refugee crisis that continues to this day.
And things escalated incredibly fast. The day after the UN vote, fighting broke out. A civil war raged for months. And then came the pivotal moment, May 14th, 1948. The last of the British troops sail away, and David Ben-Gurion declares the state of Israel. Almost immediately, armies from 5 neighboring Arab countries invade, and what was a civil war instantly becomes a full-blown international war. The fighting lasted for more than a year. And by the time it was over, and the armistice agreements were signed in 1949, that UN partition map was completely irrelevant. It was ancient history. The war had created a whole new reality, and a completely different map. And one of the biggest, most lasting consequences of this war was a massive human displacement. Around 750,000 Palestinian Arabs either fled the fighting or were forced from their homes in the areas that became the new state of Israel. For Palestinians, this is known as the Nakba, which means the catastrophe. It created a refugee problem that is, to this day, right at the heart of the conflict.
So let's look at the final outcome. The State of Israel was born, and it controlled even more land than the UN had originally proposed. The West Bank was now held by Jordan, and the Gaza Strip was under Egyptian military control. And the most important piece of the puzzle, that independent Palestinian Arab state that the UN had planned for, it just never happened. It vanished from the map.
And that's the world that was born in 1948. You see, this wasn't just the end of a war. It was the beginning of a whole new kind of conflict. These outcomes, the new borders, the birth of one state and the non-existence of another, and this huge unresolved refugee problem, these are the very issues that set the stage for decades of struggle. They are the core disputes over land, statehood, and the right of return that define the conflict even now.